mõnikord meenutatakse.
Sometimes we are reminded that the only constant in the world is change. The only thing you can be sure of is that everything is going to change. In a short-term perspective, of course, societal values do give us some kind of a grasp on things. Of course, these values also change, but they are constant to a large extent. As the first presentation, we will look at the bigger picture before we go to more concrete challenges that Terje Haidak already mentioned. I'm now very glad to give a word over for the first longer speech to Professor David Vseviov from the Estonian Academy of the Arts, who will talk about diversity as a creative force in the world. Do we need new values?
Isn't the custom that after the applause has already been given, the speaker just bows and leaves? I'm going to make an exception today, though. Thanks for inviting me. It is a big honor for me. And I'm here with my colleagues because I also am an educator. Might be that my those that I educate are a little younger, but still grown-ups. So I feel very well in your presence, and I feel comfortable here. I think it's safe to say that there is no more important profession than education. Just look at the results, for example, that we see during elections, be it in the United States and or some other smaller country. Don't we, in those cases, see very clearly what's lacking, and why are we so surprised? Why do we always say that we don't know anyone that would vote for them? Is that not the area that we also need to deal with? I don't have a lot of time, so that's why I'm just going to bring out some connections in my speech. I think there's a direct connection between education and democracy. My task is relatively complicated because I've been asked to talk about two fundamental terms. One is diversity, and the other one is values. It is understandable for everyone that without diversity, we wouldn't have society as we know it. Can we even imagine that we would have 100 exactly identical people sitting here and then the question is why the moderator even told us that we should ask questions as a group if we were to think exactly alike. And the other topic is values. If we look at the mythological creation of the world, then every creation story, every birth is, again, diversity and the creation of diversity. Let's, for example, think of Greek mythology. What is the beginning? What is the end? The world that consists of 4 elements. At the end comes when everything melts into one. And what does God do in the first 6 days? He creates diversity. And that is not even a question. It is an extremely important topic, also when talking about our profession, diversity and singularity. I'm going to bring an example. Maybe some people remember that we did live in a world that was relatively singular, and I mean the Soviet Union. It might sound strange, but along with the big negatives, there were a few small little positives. Why? Because we had a very easy way of communicating, because we all were pushed into the same niche. So, since I don't have much time, I'm going to bring one example from Tallinn and the northern part of Estonia, from my time at the university. For example, in the Finnish television showed a movie by Bergman, and everyone stayed up all night and watched it. We all came to school the next day by having the same influence from the same movie. But nowadays it's so much more diverse. And when I start my cycle of lectures talking about absolutism, then 20 years ago I could say that, children, we're going to go into the world of the Three Musketeers. Then nowadays this has become pointless. And I have to say it was a huge shock for me at the beginning, because the students looked at me without any idea, and I asked them to show by hand who had read it. I had 2 people. And it's not even that everyone needs to read this book, but back then we had no other place to go in our fantasies. I tried to create this bridge, but I built the bridge. I fell off the bridge while trying to build it, so to speak. If I bring some concrete examples from history, there's plentiful of examples. All authoritarian systems have strived towards destroying diversity, trying to undermine it. If you're interested, for example, look at the times of Tsar Nicholas I. Why is this so important for us? Most historians, for example, that are analyzing the situation in current Russia, see parallels to Nicholas I era. What did they do back then? Everyone needed to wear a uniform, everyone needed to march the same. And what does this end with? We have all read about Russian history. It's the Crimean War. This singularity in the society where everything on the surface level looks perfect and functional, where when I say left, everyone turns left, it actually doesn't work like that. It doesn't mean, however, that a certain level of limitations, for example, can't be helpful. For example, when talking about cityscapes, when we also set some goals for schools, we can't delve into extremes, much as with anything in life. The truth is somewhere in the middle. The more diverse the picture is, and what does diversity even mean? It means in human society that there are compromises, unavoidable compromises. And you also mentioned in the introduction that our time inevitably is starting to bring new compromises. For example, when talking about Robinson Crusoe and Friday showing up, I love that book, by the way. But what I love even more is the traffic rules guidebook. So what's so complicated about people not headbutting on the street or running into each other? But nowadays, in modern society, we need about 900 different laws for it, and soon there will be 900 more. We just heard in the news that one of those package delivering autonomously moving robots got into a car crash. We want to be leading Europe in digital questions, but how do we answer these questions? What happens if an autonomous car hits someone on the street? who's to blame? Is it the car maker? Is it the maker of the microchips in the car? So these are the questions that we need to ask nowadays. And now, the second part of the goal that I was given, the values. It is something very, very interesting, and we would have hour-long discussions. But I think there's no doubt that this term has a lot to do with culture, religion, society. What is a value? They don't exist in abstract forms. When we leave this room, then there's no values left in the room. When we come back after the break, then while communicating, being here, talking amongst even two of us, we adhere to some certain set of values. When we take these different worlds, the only way to analyze the dynamic of the world is to either look back in history or look into space somewhere else. For example, when we look at the centuries of the medieval era, let's make it the most important value. Life and death, their relationship. Is that a different world of values than what is generally accepted? Life, right now, here, is something temporary. It's an experiment that is defined by the word sin to decide of our eternal life, either in paradise or in hell. Or let's look at something that's very actual nowadays. Communication with people who delve into the extremes and who take the same question or approach this question on a different value basis. In the Christian value society, it is not acceptable that you kill 20 persons and you guarantee yourself a ticket to paradise instead of hell. There's a lot to talk about when talking about values, but I'm not going to go into too much depth with this. Those that have the Soviet background, as most of us do, then I'm going to bring it out once more. Authoritarian systems have always tried to create and force upon us their own values and sets of values. Our guests maybe don't know Pavel Morozov, and also maybe the younger generation present here don't know him, and it's not even important that you do. But for us, it is a great example of what we're talking about. Maybe in two short sentences, in this relationship among priorities, the state, or in this relationship of your state and your relatives and friends, the state is more important. We see the value systems crumbling in front of our eyes. What is it, for example, when just a couple of days ago, I don't remember which Estonian daily newspaper it was, where they were listed the candidates for the municipal elections and the number of them that have a criminal background. It seems everything's okay. The people have already gone through their punishment for their crimes, and everything should be okay. It doesn't pose any questions for us, or it doesn't create any problems. No one even asks them, have you really served your punishment? Have you really changed? So we see that the values and the understanding and meaning of values is changing. And maybe as a conclusion, the most important problem that I've been feeling recently, and that I've also tried to raise as a problem in the society, the problem is not so much that the understanding of the values that used to be defined in certain agreements in society, that nowadays somehow, and again it brings the parallel to the Soviet era, we are being driven crazy with pseudo values. I'm going to bring one really concrete example of this. It has to do with what I see is the most important, these criteria whereby we judge other people. It doesn't make a huge difference what it really is, but in my opinion, this value that we give is in the eyes of the beholder. But if we are being told, and again, this is something where that has been discussed a lot, but I'm going to take it out of the context a little bit also. Let's bring an example. Why do I bring this example? Just to illustrate these pseudo values a little bit. When we create this world, then it is actually a part of us. And the example is, well, that was given by the Estonian Conservative People's Party, paraphrasing, if a person is black, show them the door. And I have told one of the persons that has been connected to uttering this sentence, we have certain values, be it, for example, in music, but imagine that if we have a break and we would like to relax and someone knocks on the door, we open the door, and who do we see there? We see Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald standing there. And then we slam the door in their faces. Who's actually missing out? They will just go a few doors down where all the important politicians are and are going to perform there, and we will be here and so happy that we actually managed to show them where they belong. This is again an example of the value scales, and these sets of values can be extremely dangerous. Why? Because we are losing out on a lot of the most important criteria that we use to judge other people, and by that or through that we change the environment that we live in. How has this infected us? This is something very interesting, and I've seen it before, and I've brought this example. For example, the most negative emotion from this summer was on the Estonian island Hiiumaa at a beach called Luide. It's a beautiful beach. I'm not sure if there's anyone from the island here, and if I made a mistake with the name, but it's a beautiful beach. The weather wasn't the best, and I think in addition to me and my significant other, there were maybe 4 or 5 other groups of other people spread out. Everything was nicely and quiet. The sun was shining through the clouds. It wasn't too warm, but it was a beautiful, nice little day at the beach. And all of a sudden, there was a Audi driving into the sea, well, basically stopped directly in the sea. Music was blasting, and it's I'm a little ashamed of saying that the first thing I thought was Russians, and it's a little unbelievable. But Estonian guys, 4 of them, I would say they were like 6 times bigger than I am. And do tell me, why should I spend my time together with them on the beach just because, and I can't even say that the language we speak is exactly the same, but theoretically I heard some Estonian words mixed into the profanities and slang. But what is it really? Well, it all boils down again to the values. And when talking about the values, then it is part of our task, maybe not by such simple examples, but rather try to describe this world of values and try to hold it together. Who else is going to do it in this information society where there's so much noise and information noise? It is just us. And maybe not even during these countless hours of work. I don't know how. Maybe it's smiles, maybe it's looking someone in the eye, maybe it's being a good person. It is something simple. Let's say a student shows up in your room where there's 6 people and no one pays any attention to them. And you just ask them, hey, how are you doing? What can I do for you? And they're going to be really thankful for it, and they will smile at you for 6 years afterwards. It's not very complicated. Let's just keep working on this. Sometimes when you're given such huge topics to discuss, then it becomes really, really hard to actually focus on anything of it. I have about 12 seconds, and during that time I'd like to thank you again. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Nii, suur aitäh. Ma nüüd palun.
Thank you very much. Professor Vseviov, please stay here while the tables think about their questions. However, now I would like to give you 2 minutes to discuss, to reflect on what you just heard, and talk about your thoughts, the questions that this may have provoked. And I probably won't make it to all of the tables, but in 2 minutes I will go to a random table wherever my legs take me, and I will ask that table to give their question. I give you 2 minutes now. And just in case, I want to warn you that unfortunately I have to leave soon. I have to go to Tartu. So if you have, if you want to ask more personal questions later, then I won't be here, so ask right away.
Kas te eelistaksite niimoodi, et ma võtan mitmelt laudkonnalt küsimused ära ja siis te vastate? Nii, see 2 minutit laudkondades on.
Okay, your 2 minutes is up. And the first table I happen to walk to is right here. So who would like to speak on behalf of your table? Hi, I'm Mati Elison, Põhjala, Estonia. You talked about values and pseudo-values, and I'm very much in agreement with the fact that we all have a role in forming this world. Personally, I have thought a lot about this topic. I had one foot in politics at some point, and what I saw was that our leaders are the ones who shape our value space. And right now we have this mindset that as long as everything is legally correct, everything is fine. But when we look at England, for example, they have traditions that lead to values. So what do you think in our society could be something that could be a unifying or a driving force that we could carry these values in a better way? That is a very complicated question. And I have two options. Do I answer the first question very thoroughly in 10 minutes and leave all other possible questions aside? Or do I give you a superficial answer? You talked about the sphere of politics, and in this sphere, one criterion that has to prevail is the state of Estonia and everything that has to do with it. When I hear about proposals, I decide to weigh whatever I hear. I put the new message on one hand and the Estonian state on the other side of the scale, and see how it weighs out. And when I hear the proposal that let's not allow the 80,000 rather stateless people to vote, I guess that could allow a certain party to get 0.22% more votes. However, let's think about it from the aspect of the state. When we have 80,000 people who are in limbo anyway, after a decision like this is made in certain historical situations, well, let's think back about 10 years. And let's think back to the bronze soldier, for example. Are we generating more active enemies or opposition? Is that necessary for Estonia? Yesterday I was asked in an interview about the Reform Party poster. And in the sphere of politics, I think Estonia is the value we have to take into account where we are. We are a border state. It's a unique position. And it's the same border that runs through Ukraine as well and divides it into two different parts. And when we take political decisions, we have to take that into account. And at the level of individuals, you can't hurt other people. We should try to understand each other more. And whatever is not hurting you, well, it doesn't hurt me if two men are together or two women want to be together, hold hands and live together. It really doesn't hurt me at all. Let them live together. That's my point of departure. I think it's humane. But protesting against it, it exists, of course. But try to put yourself in other people's shoes, or your child in other people's shoes, for example. If your child were in that position, would you think the same way? In the article that I was referred, we talked about manipulation. We are manipulated through nationality, through ethnicity. But to be a good teacher, artist, cleaner, you have to have skills, you have to know things. And that's basically it. And sometimes people are surprised when I say that I'm a very big Estonian nationalist. I read Estonian literature, I watch all the films, I'm concerned for Estonia. So what other criteria could there possibly be to determine nationalism? I tell you, Catherine the Great was the biggest Russian nationalist of all times, but there was not a single drop of Russian blood that coursed through her veins. So again, when we look at the scale of values, when we take blood as a basis for making decisions, I don't think there's anybody here who could say that they have been here for 20 generations and they are pure Estonians. Let's not forget that all of our common ancestral mothers comes from Africa anyway, so, you know, think about that. Another question? My question is, when the Audi drove into the sea and they talked in a strange language and played their own music, did you do anything? Did you share your value opinions with them? Or if something similar happens to us in the streets, for example, should we react? Should we share our values with others? Well, that's a complicated question too. If I were to have shared my values with them, I probably wouldn't be standing here in front of you. But you know what saved me? One of them put his foot out of the car in the water, and the water was too cold. So they turned around and they just drove off. Of course, that's always the dilemma of what to do in a situation like that, but that's how it goes. Now I happened to find a table that had the same question. Oftentimes in school, me not so much at the university. Of course, when kids fight, you do divide them or break up the fight, but you have to do it in a smart way. The police always says, call 112, the emergency number. Don't break up a fight yourself, and that seems reasonable. But of course, there are skills requires here as well in this situation. We heard on TV about 3 young school children being awarded because they did CPR on somebody who had passed out in the street while adults looked on and didn't intervene at all. And unfortunately, I looked at this news clip and I said, well, I would have been in a bind in a situation too. And the last question comes from this table. Thank you. Hello. I have great respect for you, so I'm a little bit nervous. Please forgive me. Let's say we don't need, we don't need new values, we need a new perspective. Could that perspective be morality? And that's all I would like to say. Sure. But as with all things, we need to define things first so that it would be comprehensible. So these categories, moral and values, of course, they are very tightly intertwined. But of course, there's nothing new in this world. These questions are eternal. Greek mythology, for example, all these questions have run through there. The father-son relationships, interpersonal relationships, relations in this world, outside of this world, all these questions are eternal. And of course, they all depend on the cultural context as well. And in this globalizing world, one of the problems is that everything gets mixed up. And then it's very difficult to find a neutral solution that suits everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.